Welcome to the Athlete Brand Advisor Podcast, featuring advice and interviews about athlete branding. Learn how marketing, public relations, and broadcasting can grow your brand. We also have special episodes to talk about recent news, events, and anything in the world of sports. The podcast is sponsored by Pliable, a versatile marketing, PR, and broadcasting company that identifies opportunities and creates tailored content for its clients. Now it's time to roll. Here's your host, Glynn.
Thanks, and welcome to the Athlete Brand Advisor Podcast. In this episode, we'll be talking about a mental mindset. What is it, and how you can benefit from it? Today's guest is Gary Chupik. He is the owner of Elite Mindset, and he is internationally recognized as one of the top mental performance coaches in the world. Gary unlocks performance in professional teams, athletes, business professionals, and those wanting to find their next level of performance. And he's got some unique methods he's going to talk about with us here today, as well as all the things he can do to help athletes get ahead. Well, Gary, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, Greg, it's a pleasure to be on the podcast.
Love having you, and love the topic we're going to talk about today, which is obviously mindset and what this means for athletes. Many of them, obviously, at the college level and the pro level, start to understand it a little bit more than those in high school. But I do think that as you kind of grow as an athlete, you change your perception about how much your mind really can impact your performance.
Well, it's significant. I mean, if you take an athlete who is really struggling and you change a few thoughts that they have, they can totally change their game around. There are so many athletes that I have helped that, like, for example, one of my athletes was a fourth liner on a hockey team, and just the mental performance aspect of his game, just that. He went from the fourth line to the third line to the second line to the first line and led his team in scoring in the playoffs. So, I mean, it doesn't certainly take a rocket scientist to know that this stuff works, but if people will apply the principles, we know factually that it works.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about what a mindset is and how you work with athletes and what makes you different, because there's a lot of obviously coaches out there, mental performance coaches, you got trainers, you got so many different people now that are really under the wings of this athlete that they work with. They have a circle of people. But talk to me about what you do that kind of makes you stand out.
Well, you're right. There's a lot of people that carry that title of mental performance coach or sports psychologist, and yet we're all very different in the way that we do things. Now, there is a common language, I think, that a lot of people hear, but I like to be a little bit different. I like to say things in a way that most people haven't heard before. For example, one of the common things that I hear athletes talk about is overthinking. And I like to say overthinking or thoughts are like calories. You know, if you have too many calories that you can't expend, and then you get lethargic or you feel slow or not responsive. And in the same way, when our thoughts get too heavy and there's too many thoughts that we don't expend, it kind of weighs us down a little bit. So it's just trying to put things, like very complicated things, into little snippets. One of my experiences of doing this was with the Seattle Mariners and Andy McKay, who's the mental performance coach for the Mariners. He'd always say, Gary, you need to learn to talk in 15-second funnels. And if you can learn and master the 15-second funnel, you'll be very effective at what you do. Because I don't know about you, but I just know that the attention span of most people today is very, very short. And so if you're working with an athlete, you know, one-on-one, or if you happen to be on the field, they don't have time for you to explain 7 pages of research that you've done. You have about a 15-second funnel to be able to get your point across, and that's it. So yeah, I think part of my magic is simplicity, and I don't underestimate that, because if you are trying to sift through all the things that you've been taught from a mental performance standpoint, if you're having to sift through it and it's not a tool that you can pick up right away, then you're already defeated, because once you hesitate in sports, you lose. And hesitation costs a lot in sports.
Let's talk about sports specifically. Are there certain sports where your work does extremely well, or where you found an area that is kind of your bread and butter, or do you able to help people in a wide range of sports?
Well, it's an excellent question, because I would say that mental performance crosses over to about 80% of the different sports, right? Like it's just sort of cross sport. 80% of mental performance is going to be the same. And then that additional 20% is sport specific. And so, for example, I will like crash course learn about motocross, and I just never thought much about mental performance in motocross or mental performance in bowling. And you just never think that that would be a thing, but it is. And so I'm having to teach myself what it's like for, a professional bowler to engage in mental performance and what it looks like to them and what it means to them, because they're having to sift through all of that information and then apply that to their particular sport. So it is very unique. I would say that if someone were to ask me what are the most difficult sports to do mental performance in, I would say that it would be figure skating and gymnastics are the two most mentally demanding sports that there are, just because if you're doing a 60-second routine in figure skating, every half second is crucial. And if you blow it in that half second, if you lose concentration or focus, then it affects your entire score. So, and then for gymnastics, you're adding the element of danger in addition to movement, and that adds a whole nother element to the sport and to mental performance. So my bread and butter would probably be football because I played football and I can
Okay.
relate to those guys quite a bit.
Yep. Yep.
So that's kind of my bread and butter.
How
Although
about how about golf? Golf's got to be on the list.
golf is on the list for different reasons.
Yeah.
So golf, you do have a lot of time in between shots to think, and that's primarily what you're doing when you're moving toward and in between shots. So I would say that golf is definitely in the top five.
Talk to me about what you do when you work with somebody on their mindset, and usually how long does this take, and how much progress can you make fairly quickly?
So mindset's really interesting. Mindset is a conditioned set of beliefs that drive behavior. That's the most simple definition I can possibly give someone. It's a conditioned set of beliefs, primarily about yourself, a conditioned set of beliefs that drive behavior. And so we have to figure out what an athlete believes about themselves. It's really the first thing to address with almost any athlete, because if you don't believe that you can do something, then you probably won't. And so that belief, I mean, we talk about it in an ethereal kind of, universal way. It's just like it's sort of out in the ether. But in reality, if an athlete doesn't believe they can be successful, then they won't be. And so changing that belief system and addressing that right away is crucial. In fact, when I begin working with an athlete, one of the things that I ask them is that, do you believe that if we work together, you can get better? And I want to know that, and I want to hear that come from their mouth, because if they don't believe that and they just think, I'm just going through the motions even doing this, then it's really not going to be as effective with them. Now, how effective can we be in a short amount of time? Very effective. So it kind of depends. I like to do a little bit of a gap analysis, like where are they now and where do they want to be? And then what are they doing presently to be able to get there in their own mind? And if they can identify those things and it helps me understand what they've tried and what they haven't tried, then it's really helpful for me. So for example, every now and again, I'll get a call from a professional coach or someone in the organization or in college and say, can you help my player get better by this weekend? And sometimes I can, like sometimes I can dial somebody in. I have some magical powers, but in reality, it's usually a suite of skills that people put together that make them an amazing athlete. It's kind of like resilience. Resilience is not a lesson. It's not an exercise. Resilient is what you become when you piece together and daisy chain a bunch of skills together. And so if we can help an athlete daisy chain those skills together, then they become formidable. And I like, one of my favorite things to say is I like to create hard to beat athletes. Doesn't mean you're perfect. No. Doesn't mean you'll win
Right.
everything. No. But if I can create a hard to beat athlete because they're so disciplined in their thought life, then yeah, they're hard to play against. And then the motivation is just like a sprinkling on top of the cake. If you add motivation to what they're already doing really well mentally, then now they're extremely difficult to beat.
Yeah. Let's talk about the structure of how you work then, because we've talked about how long it takes. What does a typical relationship look like, kind of start, middle, and end?
Yeah, so typical is usually 8 to 10 sessions. And the first session is really about getting to understand the client and not just what they think, but how they think. Like, for example, you'll have some athletes that love to win and other athletes hate to lose. And there's a difference, right? Like, and not
Yeah,
one isn't right and one isn't wrong. It's just that I need to know how they think and what motivates them. And if I can figure that out initially, that can be really helpful. And then figure out where they are on this scale of, I would say, effectiveness. Like, for example, is this person in crisis mentally? Because sometimes they're in crisis. So if they're in crisis, then I need to move them to coping and giving them coping mechanisms to deal with their crisis. So, for example, if we were to look at some sort of a chart or a graph, the far left would be they're in crisis. So think of red, and then
yeah,
we can move them to giving them tools to cope with whatever they're going through, then consider that yellow. But thrive is green, the far right. And if we
yeah.
can help them go from crisis to coping to thriving, that's very effective. So one of the very first things I do in the first few sessions is figure out where they are on that scale. And are there things that are, what are contributing to, the challenges they're having. But I think one of the biggest misnomers about mental performance coaching is you have to be sick to want to get better, or that, a mental performance coach only works with people who are, not doing very well. And
Right.
it's so not the truth. We can take a professional athlete who's good at everything and actually excelling, and we can make them even better. And so you don't have to be like something's wrong, or I need to talk to a psychologist, or I need to talk to a mental performance coach because something is really wrong or something's really off. No, I find that the best players always want to get better, and that was one
Well,
of
it
the.
seems, yeah, it seems like, I mean, much like, a pitcher might work on their arm, right? And they're going to do all these things to get their arm better, stronger, etc. Every body part deserves practice and it deserves time, and the mind deserves time, just like everything else.
Exactly. And like one of the fascinating things that I've learned is that one of my mentors was Trevor Moawad, who was Russell Wilson's mental performance coach. And, Trevor at the time was, king of the hill. He was on ESPN and he was on ABC and all these television stations. Well, he was my mentor. And one of the things that he had always told me was that, Russell Wilson and I talk every day. And I'm like, what? Like 365 days a year you talk about mental performance with Russ. And he was like 365 days a year. And
Wow.
so if you want to stay sharp and with whatever you're doing, if you want to be successful, sometimes it's really helpful to have that person speaking in your ear and just saying, hey, listen, are you handling this the right way? Are there different ways to handle this? Is there a hybrid way to handle this? And it's just a way of thinking that having a mental performance coach can really encourage you to have. So yeah, it's not just about something's wrong, but it's like for people who want to just constantly get better.
Kind of came across my mind here as I'm thinking about this. I imagine there are also pieces outside of sport that you must then deal with, whether it's family life or something that might be going on that could be a distraction to their mental performance.
Yeah, and it often is. Like we know factually that your performance off the field affects your performance on the field. And so I call it domain management. Are you managing all the different domains in your life that puts you in the best position to succeed at your sport? And so caring about your relationships, caring about your finances, caring about your job, caring about your school, all
Yeah.
of those things can be directed toward performance on the field. And if you align all of those things, you've given yourself the best shot to succeed.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we do these 8 to 10 sessions. How much does it cost? What do you do? Like, can you take only 4? Is that going to be effective?
Yeah, actually, one session can be effective, 4 sessions can be effective, 10 sessions can be effective. It's just we're putting more tools in your tool bag at that point. So initially, what we want to do is sort of address the felt or perceived problem or challenge that athlete is having. But then after a while, it's just about putting tools in their tool bag so that when they come into a circumstance, whether it's on or off the field, they just know which tool to pull out of their tool bag. And if it's so simple and they can do it, and then they can apply that as quickly as possible, and it's really helpful. So yeah, we can help athletes with 1 session or with 10 sessions. It doesn't really matter, or more for that matter.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And the pay range or the cost or the investment that someone might make could be anywhere from a few $100s a session to thousands.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then let's talk about when it comes to obviously having a mindset. I think a lot about NIL because I work with all these different athletes, and everybody has a different kind of nil mindset. How many deals do I want? How many deals am I getting? How am I performing? What does my social media look like? Am I really an influencer? And like, So I try and help them a lot with their mindset. And I actually look at their mindset when I'm evaluating athletes to work with. I've actually turned down athletes that are very talented because I just don't think their mindset is right for what I'm going to try to help them with and what they might need to do to make themselves attractive to brands, etc. So it's really important for me when I look at an athlete and try and figure out their mindset related to NIL. And kind of like you said, too, you're evaluating where they're at, right? And like how successful they have been, what have they done on their own? And then what do they want to do? And do they believe that they can be successful? And that's what I'm looking for as well, is kind of those things. And then I figure out, okay, this is going to be a good fit because we're on the same page. We're sharing the same mindset. You know what I mean? So,
Well, when it comes to NIL, I mean, you have to be teachable, you have to be coachable, and you have to be humble, right? Because once you start involving money or you start talking about influence, that can go to a lot of kids' heads, and a lot of them don't have the maturity level. I mean, sometimes they do, but sometimes they need someone to be able to say, "Hey, listen, here we have a plan. It's a proven plan. If you follow the plan, then everything will work really, really well." However, one of the things that we can't plan for is your attitude and your mindset. So if your attitude and your mindset is to be humble so that you can learn everything that you need to learn, you'll probably be really successful and attractive to a coach. But someone who is sort of full of themselves or arrogant, and they're not very coachable, then most coaches don't want to touch them.
yeah, and I don't think brands are going to want to touch them either, quite honestly, because then they believe they can do things better, and then it doesn't really turn out very well. So I think that's important. But I also think that mindset can also help someone with leadership, and that's another thing I think about when I think about mindset and when I think about NIL as well. Is you have to be a leader. You have to know that you're going to take on the pressure of doing this, doing it right, much like you take on the pressure of leading a team and being a captain, and there's going to be more weight on your shoulders than the person standing next to you. Do you find that, mindset work can often help with leadership?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, to me, self-leadership is the holy grail of all performance. You'll hear some people say it's motivation. I will argue all day long that that's not the case, because the leaders and the kind of athlete that I want to create is even on their worst days when they're not motivated, they're hard to beat. And the way that someone attains that kind of mindset is by self-leadership. So if they can lead themselves, even when they're not motivated, they're really difficult to beat because they're so disciplined in their behaviors, their rhythms, their habits, their disciplines. And so they just do them whether they feel like it or not. And then after a while, when you accumulate all those hours, you just naturally are going to be better than your opponents. So that foundation of self-leadership is crucial. And I have something called the leadership pyramid that I teach. So the leadership pyramid has 5 levels. Number 1 is self-leadership. That's at the very bottom. The second one is once you lead yourself well, then you can lead somebody else. And that's just simply being an example. So it's couple leadership. Then the third level is group leadership. If you lead yourself and if you can lead another person, then you can lead a group, then you can lead an area or department, and then you can lead an organization. So, but here's the secret, is that self-leadership piece never ends. And you have to constantly be on top of that. You have to constantly be learning, constantly be humble, constantly investing in yourself, and it never ends. And we all know businesses or teams where the primary leader's self-leadership becomes in question, it'll actually destroy the entire organization. It'll send stress fractures up the entire thing. So that self-leadership piece, that character, that integrity, it never ends.
I think that's a great point. Big shout out to Katie Shanahan, one of the athletes I work with. She kind of comes to my mind when we talk about leadership and we talk about self-leadership and being hard to beat. She's just extremely consistent, extremely professional. She's going to be the captain of the Quinnipiac field hockey team in her junior season. And it's because she has those intangibles that you've talked about. And I could totally see how, that triangle would work for her. So very cool. Let's finish with this. How do people get in touch with you who want to learn more about what you do?
Well, most of my clients are on Instagram, so that's where I can
Aren't they all? Aren't they all, Gary?
Exactly. So my handle on Instagram is Elite Mindset, and people can go to Elite Mindset. And I'm the guy with the blue verified dot. So if you're looking, there's a few accounts named Elite Mindset, but mine's the verified. And and people can always get a hold of me on Instagram.
Perfect. Well, that's great. And obviously, this conversation is going to be hard to beat because we've, I think, helped a lot of people here today, whether you're high school, college, professional, even retired, getting into the business world. I think there's a lot of things here that we were able to unpack. So, Gary, I want to thank you for coming on and keep up the great work, my friend.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much, Greg.
All right. I'm Greg Glynn. Glad you could tune in and stay pliable, my friends.
Thanks for listening to the Athlete Brand Advisor Podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes from today's episode and catch up on recent episodes at pliablemarketing.com. We also encourage you to share topics and guest ideas by emailing our production staff at pliablemarketing@gmail.com. We love hearing from our loyal listeners and athletes who want to grow their brand. So jump in and be part of the podcast because that's how we roll.